Didn't have it on. Okay. I find this to be a very interesting set of chapters that we're studying. And tonight, when we look at these chapters, I want you to, as we're looking at these, to pause and look at a couple things. One is we see a good example of providence, how God works through His means, whether sometimes circumstances are positive and sometimes they're negatives, and we're seeing a lot of negatives in life, but it's all for the purpose of fulfilling the plan. God has a plan for things, and we see His providence at work. So as we're studying throughout this chapter, think about how this is all laid out. The second thing to think about is think about yourself as if you are Joseph. Think yourself as if you are Joseph. And how would you have handled all the situations that what has happened to him? You think about where he is at this point in time. Before he was 17, he lost his mother. He was hated by his brothers. He was hated so much that they tried at first to decide about trying to kill him. Then they threw him in a pit. Then they sold him into slavery. And then on top of that, he gets sold, and he's sold to Potiphar as his officer. He works hard. Things seem to be working right. And then he's lied about. And because he's lied about, he gets thrown into prison again. The first time. He's thrown into prison. If this is you, and all these things have happened to you, what would you have done? How would you have handled these set of circumstances that Joseph has faced? I challenge you that a lot of us will quit. A lot of us will say, woe is me. Look how bad I've got it. I lost a parent. My brothers and sisters, my brothers hate me. They sold me. When I finally got work, I was doing good. I got lied on, and my boss didn't believe me. He threw me into prison, and I'm innocent. How many of us will quit? How many of us will quit serving God under these circumstances? And we see here that Joseph never did. Throughout this whole plan of everything that we are given and described, is that Joseph always kept things in perspective and never gave up. And because he never gave up, we see tonight that he became one who is in second in command. Well, last week in chapter 39, we studied about what happened to Joseph, and what got him into prison was, of course, Potiphar's wife lied because he was a man of integrity. He wasn't willing to commit the sin of adultery with her, and because of that, she told lies on him, and that had him put into prison. And so tonight, when we open up the book of chapter 40, we see Joseph now in prison. Now, as Joseph is in prison, what status does he have in prison? In prison, he's already assumed some authority there. Of course, the captain of the guard gave him. Now, Potiphar was the captain of the guard. Could this have been Potiphar? You know, there's some writings that say that it possibly is Potiphar. That may be a reason why he made it. Again, that's assumption. But if you go back and read the earlier chapters in 30, Potiphar was a captain of the guard. Again, in chapter 40, it does not state that. But could he have been? Possibly. But Joseph had already had respect at this point in time. While he was in prison, you have two situations where two officers of the king were brought to prison. Who were they? Baker and a butler, or the butler is also thought to be the cupbearer. He's more understood in the translation really to be a cupbearer than necessarily of a butler. It's really how it's to be described. And you think about the cupbearer in the Jews, he protects the king in what he drinks. The baker serves food. He protects. They got two prominent officer roles of what they do for the king. And so there was questions about them and what they did in their service. Well, as we know, there were two dreams that had happened at the same night. And that next morning when they woke up, what did Joseph notice? Notice they were sad. And so he asked, and then they asked, we had no one to tell us the dream. And what does Joseph respond? Or how does he respond to this? Okay. What does that tell you about Joseph the man? Here's a young man. I don't know exactly his age. We know he's younger than 28 and older than 17 at this point in time. What does that tell you a little bit about him? Okay. Yes, exactly. But what else does it tell? How many times when we have a talent do we say we or I did? Tell it to me. Let me tell you what it is. Here's a young man that's of a godly nature saying these interpretations are to God. A young man is giving credit to God and understand that he doesn't have the power. It's God that does. And we see this again later on when Pharaoh, again, him giving credit to God. Again, a good lesson for us is that the talents that we have aren't ours. They're something that God has given us the ability to do. And you see here that he did that. So the butler, or the cupbearer, however you want to say it, gave the dream to Joseph. What was the dream, and what is the outcome? Or biggest thing, give me a synopsis of it. Okay, and so how'd that make the butler feel? I'd be ecstatic. You know that, hey, this is a positive outcome. I had this dream, and I felt, I was really concerned about it, and he had to feel good about this. And when Joseph gave him that good report, what did he ask the butler to do? Don't forget, but as soon as you get out in 3 days, go tell Pharaoh. Again, here's a young man doing what God said, not even wanting the credit, but asking for help to get out of this prison. Okay? Again, he's facing adversity because we know it's be 2 years before he even gets out. Yes, when he gets to be in front of Pharaoh, he's that age. So when the baker hears the butler's dreams, what is the reaction of the baker? Yeah, he was expecting something similar. What was his results? Do what? Anything but good. What was going to happen to him? 3 days, he's going to be hung. And so the butler had a positive outcome that he's going to be restored back to what he has. The baker is going to be hung. So 3 days later was the king's birthday, and what happens? Yeah, but so just as was prophesied, or as they dreamed, Joseph gave them a correct interpretation of their dreams, and the butler forgot everything about telling the king what Joseph did for him. So here's Joseph doing a good thing. He's in prison, still stuck in prison, still having a really, if you think of life, having a tough life, but you don't see him quitting. So when chapter 41 comes to open up, we see Pharaoh now having a dream. He has 2 dreams. What are those dreams? Okay. Okay, so he has this dream, and when he has the dream about the cows first, what does he do in the middle of his sleep when he sees this? He woke up. We've got to understand that during that time, the Nile River, we understand, and cattle were very, very important to them. And to see this happening would have startled them. It would have startled the king, and he was in amazement. Then he went back to sleep and then had a similar dream with the corn or the grain, and was awakened. And so, what's the first thing he tries to do once he wakes up from the dreams? What does he want to happen? Yes. And there's nobody there that could. But now, Pharaoh is trying to find out who can interpret the dream. Now, what does the butler finally do? Remember, 2 years later. Yes, 2 years later. Again, providential. You think about that. This scenario is what allows him becomes second in command. I keep pointing this out as that we all have bad things in our lives, and we think things aren't going to come out. We don't know why. But being a godly person, you got to have faith. You got to keep going. We don't understand why things happen to us. Joseph surely did not. We get opportunity as a bird's eye view to see providence working. But Joseph never quit serving. And 2 years later, Joseph was given the opportunity. And it could have been all about him. But when the king, when he comes out to the king, he has to be shaven, cleaned up, and prepared to meet the king. And the king asked him and told him the interpretation of the dreams, or can you interpret the dreams? Again, what is Joseph's response? Say it again. Gave God the credit that God can do this. You know, I was talking to somebody about, and I'm bad about this, the story about the history that we're learning about how the promises are being fulfilled for our Creator to come. And it's important for us to understand that why we need to know these things is we see how God is moving through providence to fulfill the promise of the Messiah. But it's also important to look at the lives and the examples of the characters that we read in the Old Testament and to see how they are good examples for us. We also see people who are, we know in Hebrews 11, in Faith's Hall of Fame, and they did some wicked things. They weren't perfect men, yet they were able to overcome and be pleasant in God's sight. There's just so many things there just to understand that we have to keep striving, keep going. But Pharaoh, go back to Pharaoh, in this scenario, I asked Joseph to tell the dream, and Joseph's trying to make sure he understood that God is the one behind this. So when Pharaoh tells the dream to Joseph, how does Joseph, or what does Joseph tell him? Okay, yeah. You got this 7 fat cows and then eaten up by the 7 small. And then same things for the grains, just meaning that there's going to be 7 years of 7 years of good and 7 years of bad. There's going to be plenty. And the plenty is going to seem so great that it's going to seem like it's something will be impossible to be absorbed. In 7 years, all that fat, all that excess that you have seen, it's going to go away. And more or less you find out unless you take care of the thing in the 7 years of plenty. And so we see that Joseph tells Pharaoh that, hey, God's giving you, I guess, a warning of what is fixing to happen. And so Joseph interprets the dream. After he interprets the dream, what advice does Joseph give? Yeah, so he said, make a person responsible for organizing and setting up and to do a fifth. He was throwing out there to make a recommendation of giving wisdom to the king. And so what does Pharaoh, how does he respond? Yes. Yeah, what characteristics did he see in Joseph to make him want to select that? God was with him, and he was a godly person. Sorry. Caught me off guard. Let's lower that a little bit. Surprise. I'm not used to having this. Let's see, Tawana and Skylar Duck. Okay. Say it again now. Okay, yeah. And about what age is he right here? He's about 30. And so here's a 30-year-old man, a young man. He's not a kid anymore. You know, he's definitely growing in toward maturity, but still a relatively young man. And, you know, you think about having that youth, the ability to be able to lead. I'm talking a lot to our youth tonight. The fact is that there's no excuse not to be able to lead. I mean, not necessarily about being an eldership in the church at that point in time, but to be able to be a godly man who can give sound wisdom because you trust in God. And because you have that nature of trust, the king is willing to give him what? Second in command. He said, only in the areas of the kingdom itself do I have rule over you. He gave him complete power. Now, what if Joseph quit back when his brothers threw him in the pit? What if Joseph quit when Potiphar's wife told a lie on him and he said it's no use to being good? What if he quit when the butler forgot his promise to remember him 2 years out? But because he didn't quit, he received and was allowed the opportunity to be second in command. And because he didn't quit, he was able to lead his people and to protect his people, who is the lineage of Christ. The power of a young man, of a faithful person who doesn't quit in the midst of adversity. You know, my past last year was adversity. I've never had that much happening into me in my life at one time. You know, I understand how easy it is to get down. You know, 3 life major events have happened to me in the last year. But I can't quit. Of course, I'm a lot older now. And I see the end, but I can't quit. And this story is a good example for me to follow. That no matter how life is, you can't quit. Be faithful to God and understand what we just don't know why. Here we happen to know when we can see the promise of what is happening through the providence of God. But don't let things stop you. So Pharaoh puts him over and he gives him the power. And he gives him a wife. And from that he has 2 sons, as we know, Manasseh and Ephraim, as well. But also, go back a little bit, of course the years of blessings came. The 7 years of abundance came during that time of plenty. And at that time, you understand that Joseph was collecting all these things, these grains, and as it said, it was like the sands of the sea, just how great it was. I understand, maybe somebody else can help me, I think that a lot of places they stored was like in caves, things that they used to store this food in cities. This is how much food they were able to do. But again, we see that Joseph was able to fulfill his task at that. And at the end of chapter um, 41 there, we see that the famine starts to begin. Any thoughts? I'm just everybody. Some of you may be writing this. Does anybody need that? So this is. I have a different outline that I use. This was Donnie, so I was putting this there for the class. I know that somebody might need this. Okay. If you need, I got a copy of it. I can give you a copy of it. Okay. Chapter 42. Now we're into the famine, and it is around the second year of the 7 years of famine. And what has happened to Jacob and his family? Yeah, they're beginning to suffer from the famine. Apparently they had enough food in reserves to last the first year. So they're starting to need food, and so Jacob sends his sons to Egypt. Who does he not send? Benjamin. Of course, that's his youngest. That's also the brother of Joseph, the son of Rachel. So, as we know, he's being to a protective nature of Benjamin, and to a certain sense, favoritism toward him. But he sends all of his sons except for Benjamin. And when they go into Egypt, they come before Joseph. Now, what do they do to Joseph? Bow. Does that remind you of anything? Yeah, that was the dream. That's the dream that he shared when he was 17 years old, right before he got sold. One of the things that when he was telling about what was going to happen, that made his brothers probably even hate him more, is you're saying, I'm going to bow to you. Now we're seeing this prophecy come into play as being true, as they come into the city and they bow. Now, when Joseph sees them, how does he talk to them? Yeah, roughly, harshly, and who can kind of tell me the conversation a little bit right there? What does he do, or what is he accusing them of? Being spies. You come out and to see the land. I'm sure as a governor there in the command, there are things that in his work he would naturally be. This might not be all. This would not be necessarily something uncommon. That they could come into the city, people from outside to come in and to try to buy and scope out the land to see still what you can get. There's nothing necessarily uncommon about that may necessarily would throw a flag to everybody. But he was trying to test them and to see how they would react. And so when he accused them of being spies, what did they say? Yes, they're all one man's son, and what is his response to them on that? Yeah, he asked those questions, but because they denied about being spies, did he say, okay, I'll believe you? No, he put the pressure on even more. He goes, no, I believe that you are a spy. And so in order to prove that they were not a spy, what was the first thing he asked them to do? Okay. Initially, they are all on, you may have said this, initially only one was going to go get the brother. And he said to go find that part, but before he lets them make a decision, he does what? Throws them into prison. Kind of getting a little bit of what he went through all these years. You think of the consequences of him being an innocent man in prison. You know, he gets a chance to see how they're going to handle themselves. And so after 3 days, what does he tell the brothers? Okay. So he comes in and he tells them that you can go and don't come back unless you bring Benjamin. I don't want to see you. I don't want to see you around anywhere. This is the only scenario in which you can come back. I'm keeping Simeon, we know. And if you want him back, and you got to have more or less have your brother. After this kind of happens, imagine Joseph's kind of stepping away to a certain degree. What does Joseph overhear? Yes, their sins are haunting them. This, if I understand, he was 30 when he started, so at least 37, 38, maybe 39 years old. So it's been approximately 22 years since they sold their brother. And they still can hear the cry and his plea, "Did not sell me." And that sin was still before them. They could not shake that memory of the sin. You need to think about the consequences of sin. It's hard to shake. It's hard to forget those things. The brothers had a hard time. Well, we find out that the brothers were speaking, but they didn't realize that Joseph, who had been talking to them the whole time by how? By the interpreter, didn't understand. He understood what they were saying. And so how did that make Joseph feel? How did Joseph react to that? He wept. He saw his brothers into a sense realizing the shame and the things which they had done wrong. And so you think how easy it could have been if you were Joseph, would you be vindictive at this point? You think of all, again, everything that they created in his life. He couldn't help that he was his father's favorite at the time. It's not his fault. You know, his circumstances weren't necessarily of the making. And everything happened, but you look how many times are we vindictive toward the people we feel like have done us wrong. And we don't see that from, again, I want to look at, we don't see that from Joseph. We see that when he hears that, we see him tearing up from that. And so when he hears that, he allows the brothers to go back home, except for Simeon. And so when he instructs his man to allow them to go, what does he do? Puts the money back in there and gives enough grain and food and gives them a lot of provisions. He is taking care of his brothers. taking care of his family. And so he says, go put this in their bags, put the money back in there, and send them on their way. And as they were returning home, the brothers did not know what had been done. So one had gotten down and looked into his bag and found what? Found the money. Their experience of being in Egypt was being imprisoned, being called spies, and being questioned very harshly there. Not disrespected so much, but being put into question. Now they're leaving Egypt and going away, and all of a sudden they've got money in their bag that they can't just justify how it came in. And knowing that, and knowing the pressure they are, they became afraid. That put pressure on them to know how to handle this. It appears as if they would have stolen money. So it put a little bit of pressure and tension into their life. And when they got home, they told Jacob. And what was Jacob's reaction to hearing about the money and about the brother? And they won't say Benjamin. Yeah, that's what he wants to know. You know, how do things happen? But they were very upset about the money finding in their bag. He was very upset that the fact is they kept Simeon, and that Benjamin was the only way that he was going to be able to get any more food. And at that point in time, at the close of chapter 42, Jacob is not willing to sacrifice any more sons, the way I interpret it. You know, he's not going to allow Benjamin to go. He knows, he's been told the only way he can go back and get food and no Simeon's there is that Benjamin's got to go. But at this point in time, Jacob had food. He had enough provisions to take care of the family in which he had. And now we see, perhaps we're seeing through the providence of God, why the famine lasts so long. He has to come to realization. Again, you're seeing God working toward preservation of this nation, to bring them actually to Egypt, to separate from the Canaanite people, to keep them pure in lineage. And you see now, starting in chapter 43, you're going to see the scenario change, and therefore Jacob changes his mind. Any thoughts about chapter 42 or anything that I may have missed? Yeah, at that time, he just said, hey, this is what's going to happen. I don't think he fully comprehended. A lot of times, you know, you wouldn't.
Well, that's Larry. I think about the response of Pharaoh. When those dreams came into your mind, they sank in. Cause of that reaction to other dreams. They took those dreams very, very seriously.
Yeah, they did. I'm thinking about Joseph being a young man outside of that area. And how that worked. I don't know as if he was old enough to comprehend the depth.
Maybe he didn't comprehend, but I think that there was enough to those dreams. Those dreams, you know, we've had visions of dreams, and I think there was enough to those dreams that they set the man's mind hard, heavy, and he took it very serious. And it's probably something he didn't forget.
Oh yeah.
But those other three men didn't just pass over.
Well, yeah, there's definitely there. That was in his mind, whether he understood it. Yeah, I got you now. Yeah. he, he comes to realize, I think he comes to realize that. I think that's what happened. As I understand it. Yes, we know he does understand it. Anybody else? Okay, chapter 43. I just got a few minutes. So when this chapter opens, the famine had continued, and more or less the food of all that Jacob had was gone. And so what does Jacob tell his sons to do? Yeah, go back. And so what do they say? What does Judah say? Yes. And that's when Jacob says, as father, why did you tell them? Well, Dad, they asked these questions. I could not, I didn't know there was anything wrong. This is what he did. And so, but because of the scenario, Jacob comes to the realization that he has no choice. So he allows them to take Benjamin to Egypt. And when they get into Egypt, Joseph sees them coming, and what does he have? Have his, I'm not sure he was in his help to do. I'm gonna say, do as he sees his brothers. What does he have done? He's gonna invite them over to his house, to his place, and so that's what they're told to go. Now, when they're told to go there, what is their concern, the brothers? Yes, they were really worried about the money and that they were going to be condemned. Again, they already been accused of being spies, talked harshly to a man they didn't know was his brother. And so they didn't know what to anticipate. And so when they come to the house, they tell, about the money. Again, there's a way of confessing how we found this, and this is what we found when discovered. Again, they brought back extra money, brought back more provisions to show some sense of, to me, a repentant heart of what they had, a gift offering to Joseph. So what happens? What happens when they get finally to sit down and eat? How does Joseph arrange the brothers as they finally come to sit down and eat? By their age, it amazed them how that they, how they were seated, how they sat at the table. And how did Joseph treat Benjamin? 5 portions. 5 portions. Yeah. Again, why do you think he did that? If you're trying to understand what's happening, why? What was the brothers' reaction toward him whenever he showed favoritism? They hated him. And here is Benjamin receiving 5 times showing favoritism. In a sense, it was a testing of them to see how they're going to react toward him. Okay, next week, chapter 44 through 47.